Critics say he had cozied up to Jewish leaders only as part of a secret plan to convert them all. And when it didn't work, it made him furious. According to Martin Luther, the Bible and the Jewish People, a book recently published by two Luther scholars, Brooke Schramm and Kiersey Stierna, whom I'm blessed to call friends, things were way more complicated for Luther than that. For one thing, they insist Luther was never an anti-Semite. His strong personal bias was never about race. It was strictly a matter of religion. The few Jews Luther knew who did convert were indeed among his closest friends. Unfortunately, the age-old notion that you must believe exactly what I believe in order to have worth remains an especially noxious and virulent disease, even in, perhaps especially in, society today, as well as far too many of today's religions. It's a shame those later writings of Luther didn't get burned, like the thousands of Hebrew books and Bibles and Torah scrolls that were burned in the ensuing centuries as a result of those writings. It's also a shame that our denomination began with division and the complete disruption of Christian unity. Still, I believe the Reformation brought a lot of good to our society and to our faith as well. In fact, Martin Luther arguably brought more positive change to politics, government, religion, and education than any other human being in history. He made the top 10 in virtually everybody's list of the most influential people of the second millennium, coming in at worst third. The Grey Book Institute, an ultra-conservative Christian think tank that normally doesn't really care much for Lutherans, still listed Luther as the most influential person in Western history. And you know, if I had one of those big foam index fingers right now, I'd be waving it and spinning around. Because despite his flaws, I've always been a fan of Luther. And here are just a few reasons why. If you attended public schools, you can thank Luther. He was the first to advocate for a free public education system, and hundreds of years ahead of his time, insisted those schools should be open to both boys and girls. Luther was the first to advocate for large print books so that the visually impaired could still read for themselves. Luther's two kingdoms principle helped to bring about the separation of church and state in much of the Western world. His point wasn't that God has no place in government, but instead that the church has no place in politics. Thanks to Luther, the worship in most churches today includes singing and playing music. You can read the Bible and understand church liturgy, largely because Luther insisted that they be printed, spoken, and sung in common languages that people actually spoke and understood. The sermon became an important part of Christian worship, thanks to Luther. And when those sermons run a little long, as I guess they sometimes do, you can thank Luther, or at least the early Lutherans, for inventing the church pew. Tradition credits Luther with both the Christmas tree and the Advent wreath, and Luther was the first to express concerns that St. Nicholas was slowly supplanting baby Jesus in the hearts and minds of young children at Christmas time. And while it's a shame our denomination was born disrupting Christian unity, today, nobody works harder than ELCA Lutherans, that's us, to bring Christians back together, building bridges and seeking common ground everywhere we can. We are by far the most ecumenical group in Christian history, forging full communion and pulpit fellowship agreements with Presbyterians, Reformed churches, the UCC, Episcopalians, Moravians, and Methodists. We're still working towards similar partnerships with groups like American Baptists and the Disciples of Christ, the Brethren, and the African Methodist Episcopal churches. Nobody's more bent on at least dialogue with the Eastern Orthodox, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, and Hindus than ELCA Lutherans. Because we believe that despite our differences, God wants all of God's people to learn to live together in peace and harmony. Believe it or not, we're actually closer than ever to unity with the Catholic Church, as evidenced by what's going on tomorrow. Did you hear? Pope Francis is making his way to Sweden as we speak, because Reverend Martin Junge, the General Secretary of the Lutheran World Federation, and Cardinal Kurt Koch, the head of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, have announced Francis and Junge will jointly preside in an ecumenical prayer service tomorrow, kicking off a year-long commemoration of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. The joint statement points to many years of productive, successful dialogue between Lutherans and Catholics. It says, because of the trust that has now grown between us, and since we have been able to remove many of the obstacles of doctrinal differences that had divided us, the time is right for us to move forward together. Disagreements remain, of course. The issue of papal primacy is one of them. And then there's the priesthood, into which Lutherans both allow and encourage women and those who are married. Sadly, at the current rate of progress, women's equality may take them another 500 years or so. And today we still don't see eye to eye on the nature and purpose of the sacrament of Holy Communion. To us, the sacrament was intended to draw Christians together, but for them, it continues to divide. Yet our leaders, Catholic and Lutheran alike, express cautious optimism that by the time the 500th anniversary becomes official, our churches will have come full circle, from ferocious conflict to full communion. Today I'm proud of Luther, warts and all. I believe today he would be proud of us for working to fulfill his final wish for the church, that it remains in a perpetual state of prayerful self-examination, and when and where it becomes necessary, reformation. Amen. found on page 5 of the worship booklet. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, God's only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to the dead. On the third day he rose again. He ascended into heaven. He is seated at the right hand of the Father, and he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. And now set free by the truth of God's gracious love, let us pray for the church, the world, and all of God's good creation. Please be seated. I will then pray petitions with the words, "Hear us, O God." Please respond. Your mercy is great. Righteous God, write your law on our hearts. Unite your church. Let your word spread throughout the earth. Hear us, O God. Your mercy is great. Earth maker, show your power and goodness in the mountains, the depths of the sea, the rivers, and all of your creation. Teach us how to care for our earthly home. Hear us, O God. Your mercy is great. Source of hope, you make wars to cease in all the world. Visit places devastated by war and conflict and nature. Places like Italy this morning. Break the bow, shatter the spear, and bring your perfect peace. Hear us, O God. Your mercy is great. God, our refuge and strength, you are a very present help in trouble. Comfort those who are sick or in pain, the lonely and the grieving, those without a home or meaningful work. Especially today, we pray for Maureen Sharps, Shelley Constantine Norris, Pat France, Margaret Sanders, Susan Peterson, Ada Mappin, Nancy Neiman, Mildred Dunbar, and Sibylla Sharps. Prayers today for Lynn, Jeff Uphold, the Stevens and Lewis families. We pray today for Casey and AJ, Donna Laguerre, Jim and David. We pray for a child with health concerns, for the victims of Middle East violence, and the victims of terrorist attacks around the world, and their friends and families. We lift up to you in prayer today Laura Matthias, Amity Kokchak, Randall Weir, Dave McLaughlin. We pray for families in crisis, those stressed at making ends meet, those who struggle in their careers, and especially for those we now name on our lips or in our hearts. Hear us, O God. Your mercy is great. Faithful God, call this assembly to remember the everlasting covenant you have made with us. Shape us to live in the freedom Christ gives us and to welcome others into this way of life. Hear us, O God. Your mercy is great. Dear Lord, today we lift up to you those who are sad, those who are lonely, those who have suffered losses, and especially for all who mourn. We lift up to you especially today the family and friends of Barbara Highlake and Ken Miner. Hear us, O God. Your mercy is great. God, our stronghold, the saints from every age gather around your throne. Help us to wait with patience and joy until that day when we too will see you face to face. Hear us, O God. Your mercy is great. Into your hands, faithful God, we place ourselves in our prayers, spoken and unspoken, trusting in your mercy. Through Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. Amen.
My help to turn this morning is hymn number 692. Please stand as you are able.